In what capacity you appear here today, please?
Mr. Stewart Nicholls from Ian Luff Motivation Australia and Drive to Survive.
Thank you.
Robin Bailey from Roadcraft Driver Education.
Thank you.
In Gympie.
Mr. Scarce, we're
Yep, Andrew Scarce, Road Class Driver Training, Bendigo, Victoria.
All right, now the committee has received your submissions numbered 22, 19 and 2. Does anyone wish to make any amendments or additions? Mr Bailey, you do?
Yes, there is a slight amendment to make on page 10 of our submission. There's a very key word missing, extra. On number 6, lack of space. It says just 1 second. It should say just 1 extra second.
Okie dokie. All right, well, Erin will grab that and distribute it. Mr Scarce, are you okay with yours?
Yes, yep.
All right, now, gentlemen, there are 3 of you. Yes, of course.
I know Mr Nicholls, and I've actually attended one of his driving courses in the past, so I just wanted to put that on the record. So.
No worries. Thank you, Senator Muir. Now, before we do go, I'm mindful that Senator Bullock does have some questions. What I will do is I'll ask you, should you wish to make a brief opening statement, gentlemen, and I emphasise the word brief if we could. Let's start with you, Mr Nicholls, then we'll go Mr Bailey, then Mr Scarce.
Yes, I would like to.
Okay, please.
First of all, thank you for the opportunity to address this inquiry into aspects of road safety in Australia. Having been in the business of driver education since 1972, we have seen many changes with regards to vehicle technology, road improvements and vehicle safety systems. The one thing that remains the same is driver development. We continue to allow drivers on the road who are not equipped to deal with everyday risk. The basic training and parental guidance is inadequate and leads to poor driver competency. We all know the burden that road tragedy places on the community, including healthcare, with the road toll on society not just measured through death. Some say the solution is to mandate vehicles that operate autonomously, or that we should lower the speed limit to cater for these low competency drivers. Indeed, lower speed limits and traffic congestion have contributed to the problem, coupled with the vehicles that are now easy to operate, making drivers bored while driving, creating a loss of concentration and leading to inattention, with a false belief that you can't die at the speed limit or that the vehicle will somehow save you. Driver training has changed over time. The focus now is on driver competency rather than skill. Areas like maintaining safe gaps, looking ahead, urgency response techniques and anticipation can all be achieved with proper coaching. With this in mind, the greatest area of improvement in road safety must be with drivers. Over 90% of all crashes are attributed to human error. Governments continue to ignore this glaring fact and allow decision makers to advise against improved driver education. Their main misconception is it makes drivers overconfident and turns them into risk takers. This is far from reality and is now redundant thinking. Our training focuses on driver awareness, improved attitude and changing poor behaviour through education. In closing, if we educate drivers to be better at mitigating risk in all forms of road use, then we will lower the crash rate, save lives and have more competent drivers on our roads. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Nicholls. Mr Bailey?
Yeah, first I'd like to thank you for the invitation to attend this hearing today. We hear a lot about the fatal 5, but this should be the fatal 8. We tell people to drive safely. What's the point? They have no idea what safe driving is. They haven't been taught. We know this as we have driven with thousands of course participants who state they don't tailgate, but they do. They say they don't speed, but they do. And they also have no understanding of the relationship between speed and energy. There's a fatal flaw in the fatal 5, and that is that the 3 most important ones are missing altogether. These are poor visual skills, poor space management, and fixation tendency. All play a vital part in the cause, therefore the prevention of crashes. I'd like to introduce you to the 3 primary strategies of the many low-risk driving strategies that assist in developing safer, more aware and attentive drivers. Poor visual skills. You don't know what you don't know. Almost every decision you make when driving is determined by what you see or fail to see. What we know is that our eyes don't tell us what we see. We need to tell our eyes what to look for, and that our eyes are our primary guidance system and our peripheral vision is our early warning system. So it would make good sense to learn how to use these systems in all driving circumstances. If you doubt this, on your way to Melbourne tonight, if you're driving, close your eyes, see how far you go.
You're gone.
No, I don't want you to do that.
Go on, I dare you, both of you.
But we also know that most drivers don't know or understand where to look or what to look for when driving. To look further ahead can give you more time. And this is the area we spend a better part of any course developing in drivers. Here's the thing, observation skills are learned. So are the easiest things to improve in drivers. Poor space management. More space keeps me safe. Everything we do when driving is related to time and space. What we know is that if every driver in a crash was given 1 extra second of time or space, up to 90% of all crashes would be avoided. Drivers are currently killing or maiming themselves to save a second, and they have no idea. This is because at 100 kilometres an hour, we're travelling approximately 28 metres per second. That's about the length of this room. In 1 second, you'll travel the distance of this room. So you see that by having the extra time and space, what would essentially be life-threatening now becomes easier to deal with. By simply implementing the strategy of applying the 3-second hangback rule, drivers can easily be much, much safer. So the sooner we see and understand an emerging situation, and the more time and space we have to process and deal with it, the less the need or potential to respond rather than react inappropriately. We can only respond to what we see, but we will only respond appropriately to what we understand. Time and space is what gives us the ability to do that. It's not rocket science. By simply having more space, you'll be much safer. The fixation tendency, the silent killer. We also know that human beings have no natural responses for driving a motor vehicle. How can we have any genetically developed or natural responses for driving? We've only been driving for 120 years. It took us 2 million years to learn to stand up.
Some of us.
What we do naturally is all wrong when it comes to driving, especially when we get a fright or in a life-threatening situation. In an emergency, the natural tendency is to fixate on the problem and then overreact on the controls. These natural responses are killing us. When we tell people that you go where you look, they nod and they feign understanding. When we tell them that their hands are guided by their eyes, we start to see, okay, we're losing them now. But when they experience these phenomena for themselves, they are horrified. They usually ask, why hasn't anyone shown this to us before, and state that this should be part of the licensing system. Once drivers are aware of this deadly fixation tendency and the effect it has on our ability to maximise our safety and reduce risk, they become more motivated to apply what works to avoid it. At Roadcraft, we understand that the high risk acceptance of drivers can be altered by placing a more concerted focus on building the understanding and appreciation that the safety of the driver is ultimately their responsibility, that human beings have no natural responses for driving, that our natural survival instincts will likely make any emergency situation worse and lead to a crash, that it is in their best interest to learn to use their vision, and that by adding more space, they'll be safer. By focusing on these strategies, we see more drivers become more motivated to apply the low-risk driving strategies that are readily available and easy to implement, providing, of course, they have the discipline to use them. I extend an open invitation to the Senate or anyone else interested to visit us at Roadcraft, where they can see and experience this for themselves. In summation, I'd just like to say, when we know better, we do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Mr. Scarce.
Okay, thanks to the Senate inquiry for providing this opportunity. I'm a workplace driver trainer. I specialise in rural road safety. My clients are all based in rural areas of Australia. I'm from rural areas and I'm in my 10th year of operation. So my focus is on rural road safety. The OECD in Australia recognise that safety on rural roads has been neglected compared to urban areas. Each year, about 65% of rural road deaths in Australia occur outside the capital cities, yet only 31% of Australians live outside the capital cities. According to Monash University Accident Research Centre, an estimated 32,500 people are hospitalised each year in Australia as a result of road crashes. Most serious accidents also occur in rural areas of Australia. The number of road deaths and serious injuries in rural Australia are not coming down at the same rate as urban Australia. The four arms of the safe system principle are safe roads, safe speeds, safe vehicles and safe people. My submission is directed to safer people. I believe a new single voice for rural road safety in Australia is needed to empower rural Australians to be introspective and to look at issues that they might find unpalatable. In my work as a trainer, rural-based staff are constantly surprised at the findings of research into road safety in rural Australia. They know why rural roads are so dangerous, but they usually don't know the psychological reasons that cause drivers to put themselves at risk. And these are complacency, overconfidence, overfamiliarity, a rural roads expert mentality, optimism bias, and fatalism are just some of the factors that the research has drawn out. These can largely be summarised as behavioural problems. About 70% of fatalities on rural roads in Australia each year involve local people born and bred in the country areas in which they were killed. And the research also bears out that most deaths on rural roads are not caused by extreme or risky behaviour, but simple mistakes on very unforgiving roads. If rural drivers are not getting the message, there must be a blockage between the research and the target audience. How can behaviour be improved if rural people aren't included in the conversation? In my experience, rural Australians are very resilient and very good at looking after themselves, but they need to be armed with the tools to improve their behaviour. Greater knowledge and insight leads to improved motivation for drivers and improved behaviour. Behavioural change techniques used in driver training can lead to vastly improved driving behaviour. Achieving behavioural change on rural roads will not be easy and will have to be carefully crafted and relevant to impact on a tough audience. This message has to provide enough motivation to alter core beliefs and compel rural drivers to make changes. It has to convince them that their own complacency, blasé attitudes, overconfidence and overfamiliarity are at the root cause of the problem. It has to demonstrate that they are just as much at risk as anyone else on rural roads. It has to show the full extent of risk without relying on distortion or emotion. It has to provide irrefutable information about speed, fatigue and inattention and distraction, as well as the full capabilities of active safety systems like ABS brakes and stability control. It has to provide rural people with an ongoing source of advice and information sharing. Experts in the field of driver behaviour control could be enlisted to put together a strong presentation on rural road safety based on the best research available. The presentation could be delivered to rural towns and regional cities across Australia. A separate presentation could also be put together for secondary school students. Another idea would be a new dedicated website on rural road safety. The website could provide a continuous stream of information from experts and allow the general public to share their experiences. Through this approach, rural communities can be encouraged to get talking, to take control and to look after their own safety on the roads. Rural Australia poses unique challenges and needs a specific program that year after year will motivate rural drivers to look after themselves. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr Scarce. Now I'm going to go to Senator Bullock, and I would ask senators if there is a question to Mr Scarce if we just identify who we are. Senator Bullock.
Well, as you were just warned by the chairman, this is Joe Bullock, Mr Scarce, and I wanted to address this to you. We've heard a fair bit of evidence about the enormous disparity in the level of accidents between city and country road use, and this morning we had evidence from the National Rural Health Alliance that said in part that in a study done in Queensland, fatigue-related crashes were 12.1 times more likely in the country. Accidents involving the non-wearing of a seatbelt were 5.2 times more likely. Speed-related crashes were 4.7 times more likely, and alcohol-related crashes 4.3 times more likely. These are striking figures that need to be addressed, and I just want to go to your submission and quote from it, because you say, "A clear, factual, unemotional message on road safety delivered to the heart of country residents by experts, can make a real difference. A roadshow on rural road safety can make its way across the country. Statistics, quality videos, powerful photographs, demonstration and crowd involvement can be used during these sessions. A dedicated website on rural road safety could be launched as part of the roadshow.
Yep.
Mr Scarce, they are some of the best recommendations I've heard in this inquiry with respect to addressing the particular problems of road safety in the country. I asked the health people this morning whether they were aware of any effective campaigns to tackle the rural drink driving problem. They said they weren't. I just want to take this opportunity of saying that I, for one, endorse the proposals in your submission.
Oh, thanks very much, Senator. It's very heartening to hear that. It's been something that over the years in my work, I've been surprised that there hasn't been enough attention drawn to the problems in rural Australia. If you consider that in the cities, 75% of the deaths in, say, Melbourne were single vehicle accidents running off the road, that would be an absolute catastrophe. Yet in the rural areas where this is currently the case, it doesn't seem to draw anywhere near the attention that it should. And to just say that these deaths and serious accidents on rural roads are inevitable is just not good enough, in my opinion. So I thank you for your comments.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Bullock. Senator Muir.
Thank you.
I just need to get on the record. Sorry, Senator Muir. Now, Drive to Survive under Mr Luff and you, Mr Nicholls, have invited senators on the inquiry should they want to visit your centre and do a course. And as we'd put to our normal meeting, I think as the chair, it's a wonderful opportunity should senators want to do it. And there are a number of senators that will take up that offer, just so it's out there in the public arena. So, Senator Muir.
Thank you, Chair. I might address this at Mr Nicholls, but I think that our other witnesses can chime in as well. Going off what we've heard of other witnesses previously in this inquiry, you guys being driving instructors must be the worst drivers out there. There's a study which has been done in the past, which is regularly referred to by other witnesses, saying that driver education makes drivers, in particular young drivers, overconfident. Mr Nicholls, can you please tell us a little bit about that study and when it was done, who did it, what it was focused on?
I believe that study was done towards the early 90s and by a fellow by the name of Ron Christie. And Dr Christie is no longer with us, he's since departed. And I actually debated Ron about 2 years ago on some of the aspects that he found in that. And he was actually somewhat outdated in his thinking because he's basing his thoughts and his current thoughts on driver training practices that happened at that time. And no doubt that driver training has changed significantly because it took skill to drive a car with a lack of technology back in the day when it had no power steering, no ABS brakes, no stability control. Indeed, if you go back even further, we had manual steering, you had to wind the windows up yourself. You had to also... Yeah, absolutely. So some of these vehicles even fitted with drum brakes on the front and drum brakes on the rear, which would lock up very easily. Certainly those vehicles were very difficult to control, especially in the wet weather. And so driver training in those days were directed quite legitimately towards skill-based driving. Today, it's more about the driver's capacity to understand how a vehicle operates and how to mitigate their risk through a lot of the training methods that we use. In terms of my own driving record, in making me, obviously, if that was the case, I'd be the worst driver on the road. I've still got all my points and I've never had a crash. So, you know.
My mum was there, she'd say, you touch wood.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I could hear him tapping the table as he was saying that.
I'm actually doing it too, and I didn't even make the statement.
Mr Nicholls, you're not suggesting that there is only one source of this view?
Well, that was the main source of the view. To find the actual view through other studies, there's no current studies that are being undertaken on the current driver training fraternity. And the reality is, let's put into perspective. We get our licence at the age of 18, and you're tested generally in most states at that age to gain your P plates. If you've been driving for a certain period of time, you automatically get your full licence, and you don't get at least looked at again until you're 80 years of age, and that's for an eyesight test. No one is looking at driver competency and what's happened in that time, and indeed those people who learnt at that time, my parents take them, they're 80 years of age. They learnt driving a long time ago on Zephyrs, and my father, used to operate a horse-drawn cart. So,
Relating to the comment that Senator Muir said that young drivers getting trained leads them to be overconfident.
Yep.
And there's a widely held view of that within all of the university research outfits. So that's what I'm saying. You're not suggesting there's only one study that underpins this view.
That was the main study that most of the bureaucracy has hinged off. Okay, there may be more studies out there, but the main study that was used certainly through New South Wales and I believe also Victoria was his study. Yeah.
University of New South Wales this morning, I believe it was University of New South Wales, sent to be quite lenient towards the idea of driver training, especially with newer technology coming in, or that was my comprehension of what was taken out of it. Something I raised with the University of New South Wales earlier on was not... Are you calling the technology bad or suggesting... I'll just actually leave the question at that.
No, I'm not. In fact, modern vehicle technology has actually revolutionised the way that the vehicle is used. But the trouble we have is that the driving population doesn't understand how to use it effectively. And I can say with confidence, and I would also suggest Robin would answer the same, 95% of people who do our defensive driver training course do not understand how to use the ABS braking system. They don't understand how stability control works. And they certainly don't understand how, in the event of an emergency situation, those features on their vehicle will react. And certainly if we think that autonomous braking and these lane correction devices is going to save us from having to concentrate while behind the wheel, is actually a miscommunication to the public, and the public are actually getting the wrong message from that. With reports that we've had, people saying, I can actually send text messages while I drive now because I won't run at the back of a car. We hear that.
Mr. Bailey, in your
I suppose
course,
this is
Absolutely.
Yep.
This is the default technology, right? And that's what I call it, default technology, doesn't require the driver to understand it. If you put your foot down on the brake and you keep pressing your foot on the brake, it takes over and releases and brakes again.
Correct, but most drivers would do what we call a latte stop. They don't want to spill their latte. So in the event of an accident...
No, that's a different issue. You
Well,
can't
it's not.
criticise the technology for stupidity.
Well, but how did they know it's stupidity?
Well, something's in front of you.
When was the
put
first
foot on
time
the
that
brake.
they get to do an emergency stop
Well,
in an emergency?
How many? I think the previous organisation said they represented 7 million drivers.
Yeah.
Now, what level of training do you anticipate those 7 million drivers need to take to get to your level of understanding and competency?
Well, at the very least, we have to be doing something more than we're currently doing. And at the moment, we're doing very little. So we're relying on parents to teach kids on how to drive. And they're very...
Graduated licensing schemes in all states.
Yeah.
I've chaired a graduating licensing scheme in South Australia.
Yes.
They are exposed to night driving, wet weather driving, dirt road driving as part of their graduated move through it. They're not competent at it, but they're exposed to it. And they go through those graduated licensing schemes over a period of time until they get their full licence. And the evidence in South Australia was that 90% of P-platers do not infringe. It is the 10% of risk takers in society who combine that with a licence and take all the risks under the sun. But 90% of P-platers did not infringe in their graduated licensing progression. So I'm not convinced that we need to try and train the 7 million drivers all over again?
Well, just on that, if you take, and the focus on risk takers, you just said is 10%. We know that majority of crashes aren't caused by risk takers. They're in fact caused by people who don't pay attention. They're caused by people who don't look far enough ahead up the road and anticipate what's happening around them. So
And that's why we have this hope for the autonomous braking technology, because when they're not paying attention, it might help us.
how's it going to help you on a freeway when you're tailgating less than a second to the car in front of you? It won't. It'll perhaps hit the brake, but you're still going to have a crash. This isn't the idea to reduce the idea of having a crash.
But at least the brakes will be hit, not just full bore into the car in front.
Can I?
Anyway,
make a
look,
comment?
I'm taking Senator Muir's time, but I can't help it.
I would like to comment on that if I could, but
Yep. Please, you might be going where my question was going.
okay, merely hitting the brakes won't be enough. All crash testing technology is done below 60 kilometres an hour. On the highway, if they do what you're doing, they're going to hit the car in front at about 80 kilometres an hour, they'll still die.
Sorry? What was the 60? What did we see the other day? Was
Your crash testing technology, currently, Mercedes are on record as saying they cannot build a car that'll save you at speeds over 100 kilometres an hour because they can't put a crumple zone big enough in the front to absorb the impact. Most of your crash testing that's significant is done below 60 kilometres an hour. So once you go over 60 kilometres an hour, the things that are in the car that are designed to save you may not. They may save you so as you're a vegetable. You know, you may not die, and this is what we're seeing, a lot more of this.
If I can just, sorry Mr Murray, just chucking because I'm listening and you're mindful Mr Scarce is up there as well, but I think I'm agreeing with Senator Gallagher too, and we've heard on a number of occasions, there is no silver bullet. There is not one single thing that can fix it, but every single initiative that can help reduce these terrible accidents or at least save a life should not be poo-pooed. Okay, they all form a basket full of things we need to do. So I
just give
picked
you
the
an
1 second tailgating, whack him up the arse and you're
example, I was
gone.
driving down Northbourne Road on the way here, and I looked over to the left in the vehicle next to me, and there was a lady in a modern vehicle in the passenger seat, and she had her feet up on the dash. Now, in the dash, there's an airbag that deploys at 250 kilometres an hour, and had they had a crash, it would have taken her head off. Her knees would have decapitated her, and that happens. So who's educated her on the fact that there's an airbag in there? And under workplace health and safety, we do that all the time because companies actually recognise the fact that that is a workplace risk. So they have to mitigate their risk by law under workplace health and safety. But the general public doesn't know this information because they haven't been educated on that. Same as driving along with a can of Coke in your mouth. The airbag deploys, the can of Coke is embedded in your face. Suicide glass, we call it, with the windows half up or the half down. You have a very minor side impact and your head hits the side of the window that's half down.
Mr Nicholls, I'm not going to argue with you. I just, in terms of Mr Bailey's rule,
Correct.
if you're
Just
1
giving us-
second...
I'm just giving us some examples of
if
what
you're
people don't
tailgating,
know.
yeah, I understand, and no one's going to kick you out for that. But just to support my colleague here, yes, you're right. If someone's tailgating, but we shouldn't say that automated emergency braking is no good. You didn't say that, but people listen to this.
They do.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
the automated braking, do you think manufacturers design that as the first port of call?
I think manufacturers design it because that's the growing trend. We also know that it's not always effective, depending on the environmental changes that happen around. So don't believe that the technology is there yet. And in terms of insurance and things like that, it's always the driver who is in control of the car, regardless of what feature the vehicle has.
Can I just come in there? Mr Nicholls, I agree with you. We can't legislate for idiots.
Correct.
If we could legislate for idiots, life would be
we're not trying to
very,
legislate.
Mr Nicholls, sorry. Okay, and I'm just getting the impression, I want to hear your side, I want to hear all your opinions, but what I don't want to hear is, it seemed to be a negativity, forget all the technology, it's no good, you know. Every bit counts, and you guys bring another string to the bow. So I'm just thinking to myself...
It's complementary.
Yeah, okay, it all fits in together, but it's going to be a long session, okay, of counter-arguments across the table. I want to hear your side rather than
Sure.
the other side's no good, it's not that great, okay, if we can, because it's important, because you see, you're the only driver trainers that we're going to have before
Sorry,
us.
I wasn't supporting that view at all.
No, you weren't.
I just want to make it on
No,
record.
no, but to
I wasn't
those
supporting
listening
that
out there, Mr Bailey, it may have sounded like, oh, forget that automated, and I know you didn't mean that. because you'd be very surprised how many people listen, because we get the emails of the abusers. Well, now, Senator Muir, before we give you an email.
Yes, all right. I don't think our witnesses were actually saying the technology is bad. I think they were saying a mixture of both the technology and the
So now you and I can have a ding.
We can have an argument. No, okay, I'll steer away from that. But earlier on, we had Victorian Police in here. And feel free, I'm aware that there is a witness who's not here present, but he is listening in. Feel free to chime in with an answer at any stage.
Okay.
Earlier on, we had Victoria Police in here, and they did quite a good, they were good witnesses to have. But it made me think, is it the role of the police to educate the public about road safety?
If no one else is doing it, I suppose someone's got to do it, don't they? And the police have more authority. I don't know the correct answer to that question because I really don't know what their charter is. It's not something I've looked into. But I think they have a role to play in enforcing road safety. In the rider program that they run in Queensland through the Rotary, they go to all the rural and regional areas. They are covering rural areas for school kids. They have a police component and the police come and talk to them about road safety, which I think is very effective. So I think taking that into account, police have a role to play, as it does everyone in the community.
I would like to say on that question that you asked, the police has a role in enforcing the rules and the laws relating to driving. In terms of education, I think sometimes there's a blurred line there. Perhaps they could actually, what they say could be misinterpreted by the public when they say, you know, it's a long weekend, we just want everyone to slow down. Now, most people are sitting on the speed limit going, what do we slow down to? You know, and it kind of like, I think they could probably call on road safety experts in this area and say, what is a key message that we want to employ for this weekend? You know, what is the most prominent issues that is happening? I probably don't think that the police actually have the role of educating the public on certainly on driver training or driver education, but they certainly play a role in talking about the risks that are out there.
Okay. Yeah,
I think
we definitely want a good relationship
example,
between the public and the police.
Yeah.
I can give you an example of where the driver education comes in. Now, the Victorian Police Force, and I'm a South Australian, I will do 113 kilometres an hour in South Australia, but I wouldn't dare do 103 in Victoria. They get you. They get you on those rural roads and they find you, and your behaviour changes. So there's probably not enough money in their budget to do all of the education and talk nicely to people, but they do educate by strict enforcement, particularly in regional and rural Victoria. And I don't mind that. I only pay one fine. I don't pay two. I'm not stupid. And that's probably where their education focus lies.
I actually have an opinion on that might actually send a message to the public that as long as you're doing the speed limit, you're safe. And from our experience, that's not the case. And Robin made a very valid point earlier that still at 80 kilometres an hour, it's most likely going to be a fatal crash. Unfortunately, the general public may believe that at that speed, as long as I'm not speeding, I'm not going to get in trouble by the police. And it does allow me to take my mind off the road because I'm okay, I'm travelling okay.
I mean, I drive lots of kilometres. I drive to the conditions of the weather and the road and the speed limit. And I've done my 10,000 hours of driving, so I consider myself reasonably good at it. And I think that's the only thing that matters with drivers is time behind the wheel in all conditions, based with drive to the conditions, common sense and the speed limit.
And you've been exposed to the road safety message through your previous life, so I would expect that.
And I'm also exposed to it through my grandchildren and my children, who are much more aware of safety and seat belts and whatever than I ever was at their age. So I think there's been remarkable progress made. It's just that we're still killing and injuring people. We want to get to the bottom of how we can stop that happening as often.
Look,
And
we
you're
believe...
part of that process. We want to hear what you got
Well, we
there.
certainly believe in our submission that there should be a national standard of let's say a tertiary course that's actually enacted above and beyond the learner driver process. Some kind of defensive driver training program that would allow people to experience emergency braking, experience accident avoidant techniques, allow them to judge what the appropriate gaps are and things like that. We're involved with a safer driver course for learner drivers in New South Wales on the panel, and that was brought in on the back of initiative through Minister Gay, and that's been a very good program aimed at learner drivers at their level of driving, peer pressure, those sorts of things.
Nick, can I just... Okay, if I can, Mr Scarce,
Yes.
what role does the Commonwealth have here, in your opinion?
Well, in regard to my submission, I suppose you can suggest that you encourage authorities to look at what's being done in rural areas of Australia and have a look at the current issues, and maybe throw some weight behind investigating, putting together some sort of a single voice for rural Australia, because they are a totally different population in terms of driving to urban Australia, and the conditions and the challenges are totally different. Just encourage that something can happen, because it's a very cost-effective way of tackling this problem in rural Australia. If you consider that just by implementing some behavioural change, which to me is overlooked time and time again. Just listening to your witness before, I think what he was coming back to quite often is that it's the most recent techniques and that are working overseas is all to do with change in behaviour. It's just psychology. If you're motivated to do something because you're aware of the full extent of the risk and you're not prepared to expose yourself to that risk, then you will make a change. In regard to the speeding issue, you talk about why people reduce their speeds because of the police presence in Victoria. But if they actually knew that driving at 110 instead of 100 for 100 kilometres saves about a bit over 5 minutes of time, then what's the point of it? If you go over your speed limits in built-up areas of Australia and you sit at 65 instead of 60 for 10, 20 kilometres and save yourself 2 minutes of time, what's the point of it? It's all to do with psychology. If you keep a 3-second gap in traffic, and in all likelihood it's very difficult to do that on freeways, but if there's a pile-up in front or an accident or something like that, and you've got that gap almost in every occasion, you will not hit the vehicle in front. What's the point of driving too close to the person in front? So save someone cutting into your gap. Well, what's the point of that? Dropping back a few metres doesn't cost you hardly any time. It's the biggest category of road accident in Australia, yet there's not enough education on that. It's all to me, it all comes back to behaviour. Behaviour techniques, psychology can make a huge difference. You've got to have education. People need to know the full extent of risk, and if they are fully aware of it and the physics involved, then if they're interested in self-preservation, they'll make the changes. That's my I suppose what drives me in my business to make behavioural change more so than anything else.
All right, thank you, Mr Scarce. I broke my own golden... I broke my own golden rule. Sorry, it was Glenn Still. Mr Barty, we are running out of time, but you wish to add to that? We've run out of time.
I've got so much to say, but I didn't get my chance. So basically...
Well, Mr Barty, I'm sorry. I know that, and unfortunately it's so tight.
Yeah.
And look, that is the way it goes. If you need to put another submission in, we've shut, but we'd be happy to take that. If you wanted to add anything more, then you haven't already added, but
I just need to gather my thoughts for a sec and bring it all in, I suppose the biggest... We train kids from the age of 4, and we start on a push-bike track, teach them to get their eyes up. You asked about the police role. One of the problems we're coming across is people are so predisposed with watching their speedo if you accept that driving is primarily a visual thing, we don't want them looking into their dash all the time. Okay, so that's an issue. We use all the defensive, and I call them offensive techniques of emergency braking, skid work and all that as a motivator, so that people understand they don't want to have to use that. It's really, it's easier not to get into a situation in the first place. So by having, if we want to make people have safer communities, we need to train the driver, because we can make better roads, we can give them better cars and safer cars, we can give them cars that almost drive themselves, but at the end of the day when something goes wrong, if they're behind the wheel, ultimately it comes back to what they're doing. And if there's inattention and lack of understanding and they let those human survival techniques take over, they will crash. And please come and do a course with us and see it for yourself. We have a very different take on the whole thing. We don't want people to have to use emergency braking. We don't want them to have to use skid work. We want them to get to their destination relaxed and in a manner that they can function as a father, a mother, a CEO or an employee without any of that happening. So the techniques and our strategies are to give them the understanding that you do not have to put yourself in that situation.
Okay, so I come back because you were champing at the bit when Mr Scarce was, because you wanted to add in, but my question was to both of you as well. So where does the Commonwealth play a role here? Where do you think the Commonwealth plays a role?
Well, I'd like to think that there could be a situation where, you know, there is a standard that's set, and, you know, providers, I mean, we're all in business for ourselves to provide, you know, this service, and people come to us for a voluntary basis because they want to learn more. They want to, you know, better their competency and increase their capacity for dealing with danger. That's a voluntary effort, and at the moment there's a lot of people out there who don't volunteer to do that, obviously because there's no financial compensation to do that. Number one, it may be beyond their means financially to do that. So if there was some kind of levy that could be introduced to say, well, if you are going to go down this road to get further competency-based training, we will help fund that. But further to that, I think there needs to be a standard that's set where operators across the country can set a standard that they operate at, and there's key messages that are always delivered, and the consistency. I mean, we are obviously some of the best operators in the country, and there are operators out there who may not be at our standard. We acknowledge that, but given the fact that we're all individual operators and we all operate in different parts of the country, we all have different things to offer. And certainly some of the stuff that Robin said and Andrew said has been consistent with our beliefs, and certainly with our training methods as well. But it needs to go further than that. And I think where the Commonwealth can come into this is acknowledge that driver education has a role to play, number one, and that perhaps there should be some level of input, you know, to get that started.
Okay, Mr Bodie?
I agree with that 100%. And just in my submission, I mentioned we're entered into a link program with the Griffith University and CarsQ, and it's backed by the ACRS, where we will be doing a study to try and get some hard data on the efficacy of driver training with school kids and learner drivers. And that part of that is also the role that simulators might be able to play to take the message and get the drivers to get up their 100 hours, because that's another issue in rural areas. There's a problem tends to be a problem with that, especially in the Indigenous areas, because they just don't have enough people who can take them driving to get their hours. So hopefully we'll come up with something out of that, but that's still a couple of years away. It's not something we can do right now. You know, it's not going to give us results right now.
But the frustration we've had, you know, you can, and it's been said, and we agree, we know this. You can have the best driver, best educated drivers, you can have the best vehicles, the best roads, but if someone's had too much syrup, you know, and then decide they're going to drive home or they fall asleep at the wheel, how the hell do we do? How do we fix that? But on saying that, every little bit helps. Every little bit. Are there any other further questions? If not, gentlemen, we'll thank you for your time. We have